The 9,608 meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary General, distinguished ministers, and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Bahrain, Bangladesh, Belgium, the plurinational state of Bolivia, Brazil, Cambodia, Chile, Colombia, Cuba, Egypt, Ghana, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Ireland, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Liechtenstein, Libya, Malaysia, Maldives, Mauritania, Mexico, Morocco, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Norway, Oman, Pakistan, Panama, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Spain, Syrian Arab Republic, Thailand, Tunisia, Turkey, Uganda, United Arab Emirates, and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and Vietnam to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the Special Representative of the President of the Observer State of Palestine participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Ziad Abu Amr. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following individuals to participate in this meeting. His Excellency Mr. Sheikh Nyang, Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. His Excellency Mr. Sven Koopmans, European Union High Representative for the Middle East Peace Process. His Excellency Mr. Hossam Zaki, Assistant Secretary General and Chef de Cabinet of Secretary General of the League of Arab States, and Mr. Nasser Kamel, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. And I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President, Excellencies, the Middle East is on a precipice. Recent days have seen a perilous escalation in words and deeds. One miscalculation, one miscommunication, one mistake could lead to the unthinkable, a full-scale regional conflict that would be devastating for all involved and for the rest of the world. The moment of maximum peril must be a time for maximum restraint. I reiterate my strong condemnation of the serious escalation represented by the large-scale attack launched by the Islamic Republic of Iran on Israel on 13 April. The use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, is prohibited by the Charter. And, as I stated earlier this month, when I condemned the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, the principle of inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises and personnel must be respected in all cases in accordance with international law. It is high time to end the bloody cycle of retaliation. It is high time to stop. The international community must work together to prevent any actions that could push the entire Middle East over the edge with a devastating impact on civilians. Let me be clear, the risks are spiraling on many fronts. We have a shared responsibility to address those risks and pull the region back from the precipice. The way to do so is by advancing comprehensive diplomatic action for de-escalation in the Middle East. Mr. President, it starts with Gaza. Ending the hostilities in Gaza would significantly diffuse tensions across the region. I reiterate my calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages held in Gaza. The horrific terror attacks by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on 7 October, including mass killings, the use of sexual violence, torture, and the taking of hostages, were an intolerable denial of the most basic values of humanity and a breach of the most fundamental rules of international law. In Gaza, 6.5 months of Israeli military operations have created a humanitarian hellscape. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. 2 million Palestinians have endured death, destruction, and the denial of life-saving humanitarian aid, and they are now staring down on starvation. An Israeli operation in Rafah would compound this humanitarian catastrophe. The casualty figures are overwhelming and unprecedented in speed and scale during my time as Secretary General. According to UNICEF, more than 13,900 Palestinian children have reportedly been killed in intense, often indiscriminate attacks. All this has happened with severe limitations imposed by the Israeli authorities on the delivery of humanitarian aid to people in Gaza who are facing widespread starvation. Israel recently made a number of commitments to improve aid delivery, and there have been some examples of limited progress. 3 WFP convoys with a total of 25 trucks were authorized to use the Erez crossing in northern Gaza on 14, 15 and 16 April to deliver food parcels and wheat flour. The operating hours of Kerem Shalom and Nitzana crossings have been expanded from the Israeli side, but security concerns mean the hours could not be expanded to the same extent on the Gaza side. Some bakeries have resumed operations in northern and central Gaza, the first to reopen in months. But apparent progress in one area is often cancelled out by delays and restrictions elsewhere. the responsibility to do everything possible to make this happen. Mr. President, a comprehensive de-escalation of Palestinians, including one who reportedly stood by and did nothing to prevent these killings. Last year saw the highest number of such attacks and incidents of violence and intimidation against Palestinian communities since the United Nations began recording them in 2006. 17 Israelis, including one child, have also been killed in the occupied West Bank and Israel since 7 October. In addition to this number, the reported killing of a we have seen in the past. I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and avoid further breaches of the cessation of hostilities under the framework of Resolution 1701. The United Nations stands ready to support the efforts of several countries to encourage de-escalation and to work towards a diplomatic solution. Mr. President, regional de-escalation efforts must also ensure the safety of navigation on the Red Sea, respecting the rights and duties relating to maritime navigation in accordance with international law. Houthi attacks on merchant and commercial shipping continue to disrupt global trade. They have been met with strikes by the United States and the United Kingdom. Armed confrontations on this crucial waterway increase risks across the board, risks to supply chains, risks to an environmental disaster from a damaged cargo ship or oil tanker, risks of a serious escalation and a confrontation between major powers with appalling political, security, economic and humanitarian repercussions. All attacks on merchant and commercial shipping on the Red Sea must end immediately. The international community must act together to prevent escalation in the Red Sea that would exacerbate tensions and undermine regional peace and security and international trade. And the people of Yemen must be supported towards a political process for a sustainable and just peace. Mr. President, the Middle East is on a knife edge. Recent escalations make it even more important to support good faith efforts to find lasting peace between Israel and a fully independent, viable and sovereign Palestinian state. Failure to make progress towards a two-state solution will only increase volatility and risk for hundreds of millions of people across the region who will continue to live under the constant threat of violence. I urge every government involved to use its influence and leverage to promote trust-building, mutual security and regional peace. We have a shared moral obligation to advance a comprehensive Middle East de-escalation effort in order to reduce risks, increase stability, and pave the way towards peace and prosperity for the countries and people of the region and beyond. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ziad Abu Amar, Special Representative of the President of the Observer State of Palestine.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President,
الأمين العام
Your Excellency,
السيد
the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres,
والسعادة
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
يشرفني أن أنضم
It is
إليكم
my
اليوم
honor to join you
في هذا
today
الاجتماع الهام
in this important
وأود أن أتقدم
meeting.
بالشكر الجزيل
I would especially thank you, Mr. President,
على عقدكم
for
وترأسكم
holding
هذا الاجتماع
and
المبارك.
presiding over
كما أود
this
أن
ministerial
أعبر
meeting.
عن امتنان
I
دولة
would
فلسطين
also like to express the
للأمين العام
gratitude
للأمم
of the state
المتحدة
of
السيد أنطونيو
Palestine to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his wise leadership of this organization,
في ظل الكارثة التي
especially
يمر بها
given
قطاع غزة.
the catastrophe that is currently
واسمحوا لي أن أقدم
happening
الشكر
in the
الجزيل
Gaza Strip. I would also like to thank
على وضع القضية
Algeria
الفلسطينية
for placing the Palestinian cause as a priority on the agenda of the Security Council, including the membership of the State of Palestine in the United Nations.
نتقدم بالشكر والامتنان
We would also like to express our thanks and gratitude to the countries that recognize the State of Palestine and the peoples of the world that believe in our right to self-determination in our land, the State of Palestine. We also thank the countries that developed their relations and that cooperated with us. And we do hope that these countries will recognize the State of Palestine as soon as possible, based on the principle of sovereign equality between nations and mutual respect. We also renew our gratitude to all countries that supported Palestine receiving the status of observer state and the states that called on the Security Council to look into and consider the full membership of the State of Palestine in the UN. We also thank Arab countries and the non-aligned movement for joining this request based on the Riyadh summit. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the plight of the Palestinian people has started over a century ago and is still ongoing. The Palestinian people was the victim of events and international resolutions and decisions that were outside of their control. The Palestinian people is the victim of a history that is not of their making. This people has suffered a catastrophe in 1948 and the Israeli occupation since 1967. We are still longing to practice our right to self-determination, to live in freedom, security, and peace in an independent state, similar to other countries around the world. We have made and continue to make great sacrifices to achieve this goal. Since 1988, the Palestinian leadership, represented by the PLO, the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian leadership has showed preparedness to close the chapter of conflict and sit at the negotiations table to find a just, comprehensive, and permanent solution for the Palestinian question. In this regard, we have made every possible genuine effort. We have made unimaginable historic concessions in order to achieve a peace that is based on the two-state solution, to guarantee the establishment of an independent Palestinian state that is sovereign along the lines of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in addition to resolving the issue of Palestinian refugees based on Resolution 194, a Palestinian state that lives with its neighbors in security and peace. Since 1993, the Palestinian leadership chose the path of negotiations, hoping that these negotiations will result in the desired solution. The international community supported the principle of the two-state solutions, and this position culminated in accepting the State of Palestine as an observer member in the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2016. And since then, the State of Palestine has sought and has called on the world to accept it as a full member of the United Nations, because we believe that an international resolution of this regard will protect the two-state solution and will reflect the Palestinian people's legitimate right to an independent state. However, unfortunately, some try to hinder the adoption of this resolution under weak pretenses. Granting Palestine full membership at the United Nations will lift some of the historic injustice that succeeding Palestinian generations have been subjected to. It will open wide prospects before a true peace based on justice, a peace that the countries and the peoples of the region will enjoy. In this regard, it is our right to wonder how could grant and recognize Palestine, the State of Palestine, how could granting the State of Palestine full membership at the United Nations, similar to other countries around the world, how could this damage the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis? How could this recognition and this membership harm international peace and security? This question, ladies and gentlemen, we ask it specifically to the United States and other countries that oppose granting the State of Palestine full membership at a time when they recognize Israel, which is the other party in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and has granted Israel full membership at the United Nations. And to those who say that recognizing the Palestinian state must happen through negotiations and not through a UN resolution, we wonder once again, how was the State of Israel established? How was it recognized? Wasn't that through a UN resolution, which is Resolution 181? Although Israel did not honor the conditions to accept its membership at the United Nations, and that is implementing Resolutions 181 and 194. Such a decision to grant the State of Palestine full membership will be an important pillar to achieve peace in our region, because the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in its different dimensions now goes beyond the borders of Palestine and Israel and impacts other regions in the Middle East and around the world. Therefore, we believe that it is high time for the Security Council to shoulder its historic responsibility to give justice to the Palestinian people by adopting a resolution to accept Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. Those who are trying to disrupt and hinder the adoption of such a resolution, they are not helping the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis and the prospects for peace in the Middle East in general. This resolution naturally will not be the alternative for serious political negotiations that are time-bound to implement the two-state solution or relevant Security Council and GA resolutions, and to resolve what is the pending issues between Palestinians and Israelis. However, this resolution will grant hope to the Palestinian people, hope for a decent life within an independent state. After this hope has dissipated over the past years because of the intransigence of the Israeli government that has rejected this solution publicly and blatantly, especially following the destructive war against the Gaza Strip and after the reoccupation of the Gaza Strip by Israel. In this regard, the State of Palestine would like to express its thanks to all the countries that recognize the State of Palestine and sincerely and seriously supported granting the State of Palestine full membership in this international organization. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 12 years, after Palestine was granted observer status at the General Assembly, the State of Palestine played a positive and constructive role in your august organization. So we do hope you will give us the opportunity to become an integral part of the international community that is working to achieve international peace and security. Mr. President, today we are asking for full membership for the State of Palestine at the United Nations. However, this does not mean that we forgot what is happening in the Gaza Strip. This comprehensive destructive war waged by Israel against our people over the past 6 months. It has claimed the lives of over 35,000 Palestinians. 80,000 were wounded, mostly women, children, and the elderly. They have destroyed most vital facilities in the Gaza Strip. They've destroyed homes, routes, hospitals, schools, universities, mosques, churches, water and energy supplies. They have displaced the majority of the residents of the Strip. The majority of the Strip is now they cannot live there anymore because it was destroyed. Gaza will come back. What will be destroyed is the occupation. The attacks of the Israeli army continues. They continue to terrorize our people in different cities, villages, and camps in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. It is high time for this war and for these attacks to stop. It is high time for this occupation to end. Your august council, we call on you today more than ever to swiftly intervene and take the necessary measures to compel Israel to put an end to its aggression, to allow the delivery of humanitarian assistance to a starving people, to immediately withdraw from the Gaza Strip, to comply with international law and the resolutions of international legitimacy. The international community cannot stand idly by while a country is above international law and enjoys impunity. Israel shoulders the full responsibility for the great destruction that the Gaza Strip has suffered from because of its continued aggression. It is also the responsibility of countries that has supported Israel with weapons and funds, that has provided Israel with political protection. We rely on peace-loving nations to end this war, to end this aggression, and to provide support and relief to the residents of the Gaza Strip. Everyone must recognize, Israel particularly, that security cannot be achieved with endless wars as long as occupation stands. A peace that is based on justice, this will achieve security and stability for all. History has taught us that our region will not enjoy stability without the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along the lines of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, to live in security and peace with its neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, an international resolution to grant Palestine full membership at the United Nations under these dark circumstances, and as the war of full destruction continues against the Gaza Strip and its residents, this international resolution would be a rejection to aggression. It would insist on respecting international law, human rights, and the right of the Palestinian people to live in freedom and dignity. This is the perfect time, ladies and gentlemen, for the international community and your Council to shoulder their political, legal, and moral responsibilities towards the just Palestinian cause and the right of the Palestinian people to freedom and independence, so that the principles of justice and peace can prevail. I trust that you will stand with the Palestinian justice. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abu Omar for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished ministers, colleagues, Secretary General, how many times has this Council met to discuss ways to advance the release of our hostages held in Gaza? How many times? Not even once. How many condemnations has this Council issued against Hamas or for their heinous October 7th massacre? Zero. Zero. Yet rather than condemning Hamas's atrocities or taking action, real action, to bring our hostages home, this Council will be voting upon a resolution to recommend granting the Palestinian Authority full membership status, a Palestinian state. How detached from reality can this Council be to dedicate its time and resources to support a resolution so disconnected to the reality on the ground? To a resolution that will have zero positive impact for any party, that will cause only destruction for years to come and harm any chance for future dialogue. Colleagues, 6 months after October 7th, the most brutal massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, this Council seeks to reward the supporters and perpetrators of these atrocities with statehood. The child-murdering Hamas rapists are watching this meeting and they are smiling. There is no bigger prize for terror than today's meeting. Let me remind everyone, the basic requirement for admission to the UN are A, permanent population, B, defined territory, C, government, and D, capacity to enter relations with other states. But, above anything else, a very important principle stated in Article 4 of the UN Charter is, and I quote, membership in the United Nations is open to all peace-loving states. Peace-loving. What a joke. Does anyone doubt that the Palestinians fail to meet these criteria? Did anyone hear any Palestinian leader even condemn the massacre of our children? The Palestinian Authority has absolutely no control over Gaza. You all know it. Everyone knows it. But even in Judea and Samaria, entire neighborhoods and cities are ruled by other terrorist gangs, Lion Den, others. And the Palestinian Authority, ironically, has no authority. So who is the Council voting to recognize today and give full membership status to? Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Nablus? Who's going to be in charge? While this in itself is grounds enough to reject this sick reward for Palestinian terror, the Palestinian Authority is the opposite of a peace-loving entity. The Palestinian Authority not only have not condemned the October 7th massacre, they are also paying monthly salaries to all the terrorists that took part in it, rewarding the rapists. This is a genocide-loving entity that doesn't deserve any status here. But sadly, to some of the members here, the Palestinians' inability to meet the criteria simply doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because to some of you, Palestinian statehood has nothing to do with the UN Charter or legal criteria. All it has to do with is politics and interests. The UN Charter is important to them only when it can be used against Israel. The report from the Council's Commission on the admission of new members even states it black on white. Let me quote from Clause 3 of the report, your report. And I quote, several members expressed the view that the admission of the State of Palestine to membership in the United Nations was a political matter rather than a technical or legal requirement. In other words, UN Charter be damned, international law be damned. I reiterate, international law and the UN Charter are only important when they can be weaponized against Israel. But if breaking the law means advancing the unilateral establishment of a Palestinian terror state, a Palestine Nazi state, then by all means. They're just empty words on paper, right? What this Council has decided to focus on at the expense of all other calamities around the globe is to grant a prize to terrorists. Granting the perpetrators and supporters of October 7th full membership status in the UN is the vilest reward for the vilest crimes. If this resolution passes, God forbid, this Council should no longer be known as the Security Council, but as the Terror Council. The only thing that a forced unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state will do is to make any future negotiations almost impossible. As long as the Palestinians feel that they can exploit this politicized body to their benefit, why would they bother at the negotiating table or support any compromise? Do you honestly think that this resolution will make a solution more likely or change anything on the ground? The Palestinians have rejected every peace plan ever made, and they continue to support terror and boycott negotiations. And now they know that their rejectionism pays off. They can say no, no, no to any American president. but still get hear what they demand, because the UN is guided by politics, not morality or truth. All this Council is accomplishing through this destructive approach is making a solution unattainable. The UN is no longer about multilateralism, sadly. It is now committed to multi-terrorism. At the Security Council, terror pays off. It's shameful. I have always called out the political rot within the UN, that sadly nothing here is based on truth and justice, but toxic politicization. And today, the mask has finally fallen. The Council has exposed itself. Please, do not give in to politics. Do not support this dangerous resolution. How can you support a resolution that is so destructive and immoral at the worst possible moment? Colleagues, the Council was not the only entity to expose its true face this week. On Saturday night, with the launch of over 300 UAVs, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles at Israel, the Ayatollah regime's mask also fell. Iran exposed itself as the terror state that it is. But today marks another milestone in the Ayatollah regime's blood-soaked history. On April 18, 1983, a Chevrolet pickup truck packed with 2,000 pounds of explosives sped through the gates of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, crashed into the building and detonated. This blast killed 63 people. You're talking a lot about embassies and the importance of embassies. And Hezbollah claimed responsibility. And today, April 18, 2024, exactly 41 years later, this council, the Security Council, will be addressed by an arch-terrorist whose regime funds, arms, trains, and directs Hezbollah. The Ayatollah regime's foreign minister, Hussein Amir Abdollahian, is a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. This terror organization, the IRGC, is responsible for carnage, bloodshed, and destruction worldwide. From terror attacks in South America and assassination plots on European and American soil to arms trafficking in Africa and terror sponsorship across the Middle East, the IRGC is in the business of murder. The IRGC is a designated terrorist organization, not only in Israel, not only in the United States, in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Both I and my Arab and American colleagues agree that the man who will address this council later today is a terrorist. And his presence here on today of all days is further proof of how the UN has become a haven for dictatorships and terror regimes to whitewash their crimes. Colleagues, it is Iran that ensured Hamas was able to orchestrate the October 7th massacre. It is the Ayatollah regime in Tehran that has provided weaponry to Hezbollah to rain down missiles on Israeli towns and cities. It is the Ayatollah regime in Tehran that has equipped the Houthis with cruise missiles to fire at merchant vessels. And it is the Ayatollah regime that launched an unprecedented attack at Israel
children are also dying from a lack of food and water. According to UNICEF, today in Gaza, 1 in 3 children under the age of 2 years are acutely malnourished. Targeted attacks on healthcare violate all the unique protections under international law for pregnant, birthing, and postpartum women, as well as children. We stress that all parties have a legal obligation under international law, including international humanitarian law, to protect civilians. In line with this, the provisional orders of the International Court of Justice on 26 January and 28 March must be complied with. Excellencies, since the beginning of this conflict, the delivered levels of aid into Gaza have been highly insufficient due to physical restrictions and bureaucratic impediments. Malta reiterates that denial of humanitarian assistance is a grave violation of international law, and the use of starvation as a weapon of war may constitute a war crime. Furthermore, we strongly underline that the safety of UN personnel, humanitarians, and journalists must be guaranteed. We call for Israel to both fully respect and utilize the humanitarian notification system as intended, and conduct an independent investigation into all killings of UN and humanitarian staff. Commercial trade must also be allowed to resume, as the people of Gaza cannot remain dependent on aid alone. In the words of the Secretary General, a paradigm shift is required to adequately address the desperate conditions in Gaza. Just yesterday, this Council held a briefing on the indispensable nature of UNRWA and its life-saving services. We maintain that the agency is a stabilizing force in the region and demands our continued support and resources. Turning to the wider region, the ripple effect of the war in Gaza, including that we have witnessed over the last days, is deeply troubling. The heightened tensions in the region and the increased escalations and skirmishes in the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen push the region closer to an untenable conflagration. Immediate de-escalation and restraint is of paramount importance. International law and diplomacy must be our guiding principles. In the West Bank, rising violence targeting civilians and intensified military operations push the occupied Palestinian territory into further instability. Malta stresses that the illegal Israeli settlements, demolition of Palestinian property, and settler violence are an obstacle to peace, violate international law, and threaten the viability of a two-state solution. We call on Israel to reverse such actions and abide by the relevant Security Council resolutions. We welcome ongoing efforts towards reinforcing and revitalizing the Palestinian Authority. The international community must support all actions which would allow its effective governance in line with the two-state solution and with Gaza as part of an independent Palestinian state. Fundamentally, a just resolution of this conflict demands a reality which embraces the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for UN membership and statehood. It also demands a reality in which Israelis live in security without being held hostage by the threat of terrorism. The parameters of realization of this vision are well known and must be pursued as a matter of urgency. Malta reaffirms its unwavering commitment to a comprehensive political solution based on the two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states living side by side in peace and security, and this in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you, and I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad of Algeria.
أشكركم سيد الرئيس وأرجو أن تتقبلوا من هذا الوفد أسمى عبارات الامتنان وأرقاها على
accept our deepest gratitude for the holding of this meeting today. This is a session which we believe will be a good step in the right direction. We are talking today about granting the status of full membership to the State of Palestine within our organization, which means that we are going to re-examine the Palestinian cause upon this solid basis, which means that we're going to shed light on the very essence of this, which cannot be defigured, cannot be altered, cannot be tested. What do I mean by essence? What do I mean by its substance in this way? I mean its historic and legitimate right for the Palestinian people to create an independent, sovereign state. This is a historic right, approved by the international community within this august organization 76 years ago. The international community is attached to consolidating this as a just, lasting and definitive solution for the Palestinian cause. This is a historic right which has not been implemented, and the lack of implementation of this right is the cause of the prolongation of this Arab-Israeli conflict. This is the cause of the lack of security and safety in our region, a region which hasn't known peace for over 70 years. This is a historic right that Israeli occupation today stubbornly rejects and torpedoes at its very basis. Israeli occupation clearly and unequivocally rejects this and does everything it can to eradicate it, and it does this unscrupulously, with no qualms. Gaza, in its resistance, has shown the aims of Israeli occupation fully, whether this be visible or not, in order to liquidate the Palestinian cause. This is why this has been done, and to hinder our national project with regard to this Palestinian cause. Nobody is unaware of the fact that the genocidal war in Gaza and the suffocation upon the West Bank and the settlement and annexation policies upon Palestinian territories, as well as occupied Jerusalem and the campaign of forced displacement upon Palestinian people, are continuing, without forgetting what is known as the Israeli arrangements following the war in Gaza. All of this are succeeding steps as part of a broader and much more dangerous Israeli plan. This Israeli plan wants to resuscitate and bring into being the greater project of Israel, which is to eradicate the foundations of a Palestinian state and destroy its pillars. Indeed, the entire world bore witness just a few months ago to what an Israeli authority did here in the General Assembly, holding up a map of the Middle East where Palestine did not appear. This was a map constructed of their hallucinations and desires. The escalation imposed by Israeli occupation is continuing on a number of fronts in our region. The aim of this escalation is now clear: to distract the international community's attention away from the Palestinian cause and to try to create new regional conflicts where the rights of Palestinian people would gradually be dissipated, or where the flame of the Palestinian cause would be extinguished. After everything I have just said, can some still allow themselves to follow the allegations by the Israeli occupiers and to follow their plans, which we have all too well understood, and we've understood the motive behind it? After all of this, is it difficult for some to understand the true face of Israeli occupation? An occupation made up of colonization, which insists on propagating and spreading illusions and undermining the security and stability of the Middle East. Upon the ruins of a Palestinian national project. After all of this, can some, even a few, still insist on saying that it is not yet time to grant Palestine the status of full member to our organization? This situation is dangerous, the situation facing the Palestinian cause. This Council has a historic responsibility, and a decisive one. A decisive responsibility which is essential. That is, the responsibility to act immediately, to impose the two-state solution and to safeguard the foundations of the creation of a Palestinian state. The two-state solution is facing imminent mortal danger. I repeat, the two-state solution is facing imminent mortal danger. We must save this solution before it is too late, which means granting the status of full membership to the State of Palestine, to safeguard peace and stability, to safeguard security in the Middle East as a whole. Any hesitation or wavering will have disastrous consequences and would give carte blanche or a green light to the Israeli occupation to continue with its plans. That is, stealing, plundering, expansion on one side, and extremism and obstination on the other side. In this regard, Algeria had the honor of hosting the declaration of the creation of a Palestinian state on the 15th of November 1988. We also had the honor of being the first country to recognize the Palestinian state officially. As part of this historic legacy, which we are very proud of, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, from the tribune of the General Assembly during its last session, called for an acceleration of the process of granting the status of full membership to the State of Palestine within our organization. My country swiftly put forward a draft resolution to this august council, and in coordination, full coordination with our Palestinian and Arab brothers and sisters, and also working with other various regional groups in favor of the Palestinian cause. So the League of Arab States, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the African Union. The time has come to assume our responsibilities and our duties without faltering. And without avoiding or eluding such responsibilities, we must keep our promises, which is why we urge all members of this August Council to support our efforts, thanks to their precious voices in favour of granting the status of full membership to the Palestinian state. This will achieve the following three things. First of all, it will consolidate the two-state solution and protect it from threats which seek to undermine it, destroy it, or even bury it altogether. Secondly, it will safeguard the foundations of the Palestinian state in the future, an independent sovereign state within the 1967 borders with Jerusalem Quds Sharif as a capital. Thirdly and finally, this will build the peace process upon solid foundations, which will allow for a mobilization of efforts and to respond to the needs of the Palestinian cause in order to restore peace, stability and security throughout the Middle East. Nobody is unaware that such a step is a very simple one. This is what we must do, we as humanity, meeting here within this august body. It is our duty to thousands and thousands of Palestinian people who are being martyred every day, every hour, every minute, every second indeed, in order to ensure that their cause lives on, our cause, the cause of humanity as a whole. Justice must be served to the Palestinian people. This is a duty. This is a legal duty, a political duty, and a security duty. It is a duty at the scale of humanity and civilization as a whole. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mr. Renata Felbar-Ček, Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. We find ourselves at a defining moment for the crisis in the Middle East and for this Council's role in addressing it. As we are facing growing danger of a full-scale regional escalation, we cannot lose sight of the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. I would like to reiterate our firm view that this is where the master key to easing tensions in the region is. I would like to offer 3 steps that can help us move away from the edge. Firstly, there must be immediate and full compliance with the Security Council resolutions and ICJ orders related to the conflict in Gaza. This should not be an ambiguous call, but a clear demand. All member states have the obligation to uphold the UN Charter, including through implementing Security Council resolutions. We condemn the attack of Hamas of 7 October and strongly deplore that the hostages are still being held in Gaza while their families continue to suffer in anguish for their safety and well-being. Families, homes, schools, hospitals, roads and infrastructure in Gaza are being destroyed. People are helpless while their lives are collapsing, while famine and disease are looming. Women and children bear the brunt of this conflict. We all hear their desperate calls for help. We call on Israel to remove complex barriers to humanitarian aid and cooperate with the UN to organize a faster and safe distribution of assistance. We condemn all violation of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, and we call for accountability, including for sexual violence. The threat of the military offensive in Rafah, which we strongly oppose, is still here. In recent days, the situation in the West Bank is escalating. These are the fires that we have to extinguish before they engulf in whole region. We need urgent implementation of Resolution 2728, followed by a comprehensive political solution to the crisis. We believe that a ceasefire in Gaza would be a key element for reducing the boiling tensions in the region, including along the Blue Line and the Red Sea and elsewhere. Secondly, all actors and their partners in the region must exercise maximum restraint. We must defuse and de-escalate the situation. Missiles and drones will not address the root causes of the crisis. They are not solutions, just the retaliations are not dialogue. Diplomacy is the only way forward. Thirdly, we must start and support the political process leading to a two-state solution. We are of the view that the Council must do its part in the political process, and in its regard, we welcome the draft resolution proposed by France. We believe the two-state solution must be based on sovereign equality of the states, and we therefore support the equal status in the UN. It would strengthen the role of the Palestinian Authority and would contribute to the security of Israel as well. Mr. President, all of us seated around this table, permanently or not, have a primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. We should therefore shoulder that responsibility with a clear commitment to stop this spiral of conflict, with a clear commitment to the UN Charter and international law. People in Palestine, Israel, and the whole Middle East do not ask for the impossible. They want peace and security and a viable vision of a better, dignified future. Let us all do everything in our power to make this happen. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Shelbar Beck for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Uemura Tsukasa, Special Envoy for the Middle East of Japan.
Thank you. I thank His Excellency Mr. Borge, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Trade of the Republic of Malta, for his initiative. My appreciation also goes to the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, the conflict which started with the attack by Hamas and others last October has continued for more than 6 months. First, let me express my heartfelt condolences to all the victims, including women, children, and humanitarian aid workers and their families. The world does not want to see the loss of lives and the cycle of violence anymore. Yet, the conflict endures. I sincerely hope continued discussions and a show of will in the Security Council will lead to a change in behavior by the parties concerned and an improvement of the situation. Last month, this Council adopted Resolution 2728, which demanded an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Japan has urged all parties to act in good faith based on this resolution. Japan takes note of the improvement to a certain extent in the environment surrounding humanitarian assistance, including humanitarian access. However, further effort needs to be made for a drastic change in the catastrophic situation on the ground. We have not seen a ceasefire realized yet either. Mr. President, countries concerned have made serious efforts outside this chamber to achieve the release of the hostages and the ceasefire. I believe those who serve best should be honored most. The Security Council must foster and encourage these efforts. A full-scale military operation in the densely populated area of Rafah would be a disaster that would result in many more casualties. Such an outcome is unacceptable. Mr. President, we are now witnessing an extremely dangerous situation that could have devastating consequences for the entire region and the world. Japan is deeply concerned about Iran's attack against Israel, which increases insecurity in the Middle East. We strongly condemn such an escalation. Japan has been urging the parties concerned to calm down the situation and reiterate its determination to continue to make all necessary diplomatic efforts in order to prevent any further deterioration. Further, the spiral of violence between Israel and Hezbollah is continuing, and attacks on vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden by the Houthis are impeding the free and safe passage of vessels. Mr. President, to end the current tragedy and achieve lasting peace and stability in the Middle East, there is no solution other than peaceful coexistence between Israel and Palestine. To reach this goal, mutual trust is indispensable. Building trust is not an easy task. It will not only require time to heal the existing hatred and grief, but also a clear mutual commitment towards confidence building. Given the situation in front of us, it may even seem an almost impossible mission. However, Japan will not give up and will continuously contribute to the realization of a two-state solution through its own initiatives and efforts. And Japan will remain an escort runner for Palestine, Israel, and all the people living in the Middle East in good times and bad. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Tsukasa, for his statement. So, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank the Secretary General for his report. For 7 months now in the Middle East, the acutest possible conflict is raging. It's claimed the lives of over 34,000 peace-loving citizens of Gaza. The spiral of escalation with each passing day is being wound tighter and tighter, involving more and more countries in the region. For the very first time in decades, the threat of a large-scale armed conflict looms large. Today's meeting is an excellent opportunity for us to assess what the international community has managed to do in order to resolve this crisis, and what it hasn't managed to do either. The first and most important thing is whether the Security Council demanded, as per its mandate, for the parties to immediately engage in a ceasefire. Indeed, yes, Resolution 2278, it de facto covered the period to the end of Ramadan, which is over. It did so, but it also called for a lasting and sustainable ceasefire. To get there, the Russian Federation and China had to veto the American draft resolution, the purpose of which was specifically to ensure that there was no ceasefire. Did the Council manage to control the implementation of this decision and to compel those who had ignored that decision to do so? Alas, no. This happened, well, did it happen because we didn't do enough? Such an assertion would be blatantly false. Starting on the 7th of October 2023, the Council worked day in, day out, discussing possible products geared towards ending the violence in Gaza. Delegations authored no less than 10 different draft resolutions, which I'm sure you'll agree is a fairly large number. As early as the 16th of October, the Russian Federation authored the first draft on the ceasefire in the Strip. It received a negative vote from France, the UK, the US, and Japan. The next draft was authored by Brazil, submitted on the 18th of October. The US was the only delegation to veto it, although it did contain, this is highly important, as our US colleagues are now telling us, highly important wording condemning Hamas. Just imagine how many lives we could have saved if these proposals received support at the time. This includes the lives of
hostages, the release of which we also demanded. Since then, Washington has cast 3 more vetoes, preventing the Council from taking a decision which would have stopped Israel's military operation in Gaza. Our American colleagues did not conceal that they view the Security Council as a stumbling block, which shouldn't get in the way of their effective diplomacy on the ground. In actual fact, they did this to give their main Middle Eastern ally a free hand to clear out the enclave. We remember very well, and we hope other Security Council members do too, that the US delegation demanded the deletion of the mere mention of the necessity to stop the violence from all drafts. Colleagues, every US veto cast on Gaza, it's not just another statistic in the SC's history. We shouldn't forget that it has a frightful price. It comes with a specific frightful price. The lives of thousands of peaceful citizens, peaceful people in Gaza. It took 6 months for Washington to at least realize that it has lost any means of influence over Israel. The tail is wagging the dog. Tel Aviv is dictating its conditions, demanding unconditional support from the US for all of its reckless decisions. Back then, in March, the US, which has been rebuked by practically the entire international community for all of its inhumane vetoes cast, the US tried to whitewash themselves, authoring a very strange draft resolution. In it, the US waxed philosophical, determining an imperative for a ceasefire without actually demanding one. At the same time, the resolution was chock-a-block with plants and mines, which de facto gave the green light for a further military operation conducted by Israel, including the clearing out of Rafah. As I said, together with China and Algeria, we couldn't let the Security Council to approve this license to kill further peaceful Palestinians. And thanks to this, the Security Council 3 days later adopted the aforementioned document authored by the E10, containing a demand for a ceasefire throughout Ramadan. Today, the US is disingenuously accusing Russia and China of vetoing its wonderful product. In reality, our veto was an example of why we need this instrument, the veto. At the same time, it also offers a response to all those calling for the veto's abolishment. It's necessary because we need to avoid the adoption of imbalanced and cunning decisions being promoted by Washington. Unfortunately, Israel is openly ignoring Resolution 2728, with the US's encouragement, which actually rushed to call this Security Council resolution non-binding. As a result, we have a situation whereby the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territory, Francesca Albanese, she's been compelled to recognize that Israel has met the threshold for the crime of genocide. She also characterized assertions by Israel's leadership about the fact that they're allegedly abiding by international humanitarian law, and also Israel's use of the right of self-defense and the fight against terrorism as pretexts. Ms. Albanese characterized these as humanitarian camouflage. I have a second question for you. Through our collective efforts, did we manage to improve the humanitarian situation in the enclave? The answer, again, is not in our favor. The Council adopted 2 humanitarian resolutions, 2712 and 2720. And yet, without a lasting ceasefire, these resolutions, as we warned everyone, remain dead letter. Humanitarian aid workers cannot do their job against the backdrop of active hostilities. These people are unarmed. Not only can they not help civilians, they can't actually defend themselves. We repeat that despite the disinformation being spread by the US, both of the aforementioned resolutions, just like Resolution 2728, contained measures for protecting humanitarian aid workers. And yet, without a ceasefire, they cannot be implemented. Israel's clear-out of Gaza has already earned the dubious distinction of claiming the highest number of lives of humanitarian workers. Over 240 people have died, including 178 UNRWA staff. and this clear-out is not yet over. The Israeli military is hitting humanitarian convoys, blocking access, slowing the passage of supplies. And yet, Western states are only castigating Israel for these actions if Western citizens die as a result. All calls for deconfliction, which are based on the goodwill of field commanders, are empty. They won't actually do anything to change the dire situation of humanitarian aid workers on the ground unless we have a fully fledged ceasefire. The last question I'd like to put to you is this. Did the international community manage to prevent a spillover of the conflict throughout the region? The answer is, once again, no. The situation on the Lebanese-Israeli border is highly unstable. Lebanon and Syria are being subjected to Israeli bombing constantly. Our Western colleagues, specifically the US, the UK, and France, are to blame for the fact that the Security Council did not condemn Israel's strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus on the 1st of April, which would have reaffirmed this sacred basis of a sacred principle of international relations, the inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises and staff. This resulted in a new, highly dangerous uptick in regional escalation. The consequences are wholly unpredictable. Such disdain on the part of our Western colleagues to specific states and their rights, their division of the world into us and them, the us are above the law, the them, well, their lawful interests can be ignored. This has brought the Middle East to the brink of a large-scale war. This is what you call effective diplomacy. This is what it looks like. The fruit of it, the fruit it bears this time, each time this diplomacy, is more victims and more destruction. By the way, another effect of this disdain is, despite the clear demand of Algeria, that we haven't managed to protect Palestinians from Israeli slaughter. We haven't been managed to end the spiral of violence. Not to mention the fact that since 1948, we haven't managed to help Palestinians secure a fully fledged state. The ambassador of Israel, in his statement, and in fact we knew what he was going to say before he said it, was disrespectful towards ministers from the region who are in the room today, Arab ministers and other ministers. For a long time now, the PR of Israel has managed to say awful things about UN staff, the SG, and today he called the Security Council the Terror Council. This is insulting. He forgot, probably, that the State of Israel was, in fact, established on the recommendation of the Security Council based on a General Assembly resolution. Do you want to cast doubt on this decision as well? Perhaps the Israeli ambassador will answer my question. Did Israel meet the criteria for membership when it was admitted to the UN? A short sideline about history. This is a letter from the chairman of the Committee on Admission of New Members to the President of the Security Council, dated 1948. It's a very short letter. I'm going to read it.
The Security Council Membership Committee has discussed Israel's application for admission to membership of the United Nations. As a result of its discussions, the committee came to the conclusion that it was not at present in possession of the requisite information to enable it to come to any decision. In particular, it was pointed out in the committee that the General Assembly itself had not yet reached any conclusion on the Palestinian question as a whole. The USSR and Ukrainian delegates declared, however, that for their part, they saw no reason whatever for delaying Israel's admission to the United Nations. The Syrian delegate, on the other hand, expressed his opposition to the application for admission and added that the application did not merit consideration. The Security Council Membership Committee has instructed me to apprise the Council of the above. The committee considers that it will be for the Security Council to decide at the proper time whether to refer the matter back to the committee or take a decision itself.
Then, on the 7th of March 1949, a letter from the President of the Security Council was drafted, transmitting the draft resolution on the admission of Israel. It was transmitted to the General Assembly. Therefore, the mere minimum we're compelled to do, based on all moral imperatives, is to satisfy Palestine's aspiration for UN membership. Palestine has walked a lengthy and agonizing path towards this point. Since 2012, it has enjoyed a singular status at the UN, a non-member observer state. It's one step away from permanent membership. We call on all Security Council members to vote in favor of the relevant draft resolution, which was put forward, as I said earlier, on behalf of the Arab States Group by Algeria. We're convinced that recognizing Palestine and its status on par with Israel will help the long-term settlement of the Palestine-Israeli conflict on the basis we all know well, an international legal basis endorsed by the UN and buttressed by the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative. The goal being the establishment of an independent, contiguous, sovereign Palestinian state within 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, which would live side by side with Israel in peace and security. It's clear that to advance towards this goal, in addition to efforts which involve the resolution of the aforementioned acutest humanitarian issues, we also need the establishment of a collective diplomatic mechanism. We stand convinced that in such a mechanism, a key role should be played by countries from the region, Arab states, Islamic states. They understand no less, they probably understand better and more than others about how to achieve a fair solution which would be founded on a mutually agreed international legal basis. Of course, none of this should overshadow the immutable importance of a ceasefire as per Resolution 2728. If the resolution isn't implemented, the Security Council is within its rights to impose sanctions on those who violate and sabotage its decisions. We'll be reverting to this issue very soon. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And let me start by thanking the Secretary-General for briefing us today. Let me start by reiterating that the UK condemns, in the strongest terms, Iran's unprecedented attack against Israel, as well as its violation of Jordan and Iraq's airspace. The UK continues to call for de-escalation and remains steadfast in our commitment to protecting and upholding stability in the region. Iran's actions do nothing to advance the prospects for peace in Israel and Gaza. President, the UK condemns the October 7 attacks unequivocally and calls for the unconditional and immediate release of all the hostages. The United Kingdom remains resolved to work with international partners to urgently secure an immediate pause to get aid in and hostages out, and then progress to a permanent, sustainable ceasefire without a return to fighting and loss of life. We also urgently call for the full implementation of Resolution 2720 to protect civilians and enable humanitarian assistance. There is a devastating and growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Gazans need more aid, and they need it now. We welcome Israel's commitments to fully open Ashdod port and the Erez checkpoint, and to increase capacity through the Jordan land corridor. We are resolved that the international community will work with Israel to see these vital changes fully implemented. As my Foreign Secretary made clear during his visit to the region yesterday, we must maintain our focus on getting more aid into Gaza and getting hostages out. For our part, the UK has trebled our aid commitment this financial year. We will keep doing everything we can to get more aid in by land, sea and air to reach people in desperate need in Gaza. President, we support a two-state solution that guarantees security and stability for both the Israeli and Palestinian people. We must give the people of the West Bank and Gaza the political perspective of a credible route to a Palestinian state and a new future. And it needs to be irreversible. This is not entirely in our gift. However, Britain and our partners can help by confirming our commitment to a sovereign, viable Palestinian state. On recognition, this cannot come at the start of the process, but it does not have to be the very end of the process. Our long-standing position has been that we will recognise a Palestinian state at a time that is most conducive to the peace process. That pathway must start with fixing the immediate crisis in Gaza. President, we must focus collectively on the vital elements for a lasting peace. These include the release of all hostages, the formation of a new Palestinian government for the West Bank and Gaza, accompanied by an international support package, removing Hamas' capacity to launch attacks against Israel, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza, and, as I have mentioned, a political horizon which provides a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution. Finally, President, I'd like to address the ongoing settlement expansion and demolition of Palestinian properties in the occupied Palestinian territories. We are clear that settlements are illegal under international law and once again urge Israel to halt settlement expansion immediately. The UK remains committed to acting robustly to support peace and stability in the region. President, let me end by reiterating the UK's commitment to a two-state solution and turning this Council's words into actions. We must work together to make this vision for peace a reality. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Timothy Musa Kabba, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President, the Honorable Dr. Ehrenborg, Minister for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs and Trade of Malta. I thank the Presidency of Malta for convening this meeting in the format of a high-level open debate. I also thank the United Nations Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his comprehensive and sobering briefing. Today's debate is being held in the context of the request for the admission of the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations, 13 years after Palestine's application was first considered by the Security Council's Admission Committee. Sierra Leone recognizes the basis for such a request, which in our view is legitimate and could create the pathway to a political horizon founded on the principles of the two-state solution, based on United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1812, which recommends for an independent Arab and an independent Jewish state. And in line with Article 4 of the United Nations Charter, Sierra Leone support the application of the State of Palestine for admission as a member of the United Nations. Our support is in line and within the context of our consideration of Article 4 of the United Nations Charter, Rules 58, 60 of the Security Council Provisions of Procedure, and the guidance provided by the International Court of Justice in its 28 May 1948 advisory opinion on conditions of admission of a state to membership in the United Nations. This request for reconsideration of the 2011 application for membership to the United Nations by the State of Palestine has come in 6 months into the conflict between Israel and Hamas. We have had first-hand testimonies about what it means to live in the Gaza Strip since 7th October 2023. There are expert reports on the impact of the conflict on women, children, humanitarian workers, journalists, and other vulnerable groups, and all civilians in Palestine as well as Israel. In the Gaza Strip, we are raising against time to prevent famine and infectious diseases epidemics. We therefore reiterate our strong call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and for Resolution 2712, 2720, and 2728 to be fully respected by the parties and implemented. For 6 months, we have made it unequivocally clear the 7th October 2023 heinous attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians is unacceptable. We condemn the taking of hostages, with 134 of those hostage still being held by Hamas and other armed groups. Hostage taking is a serious violation of international law, and we repeat our call, the call by the Security Council, the call of the General Assembly, and the call by the International Court of Justice for all hostages to be immediately and unconditionally released. We have also deemed as wholly unacceptable the military response of Israel, characterized by massive bombardment of Gaza Strip without distinction, proportionality, protection of civilians, civilian objects, and humanitarian personnel. The killings and suffering and collective punishment must stop. Sierra Leone urges accountability for all violations and international law by the parties. Mr. President, Sierra Leone continues to urge de-escalation, continuing political and diplomatic engagement following the emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council on 14th April 2024. We recall our condemnation of claimed reprisal attacks not in conformity with international law and the United Nations Charter. We also recall our condemnation of the use of force in violation of the UN Charter, relevant international law including the development and conduct of friendly relations, diplomatic and consular protections, as well as conduct in the region that may lead to an escalation or exacerbation in the already volatile situation in the Middle East. We regrettably further note with concern the rising tensions in the occupied West Bank across the Blue Line in Lebanon, with the exchange of rockets, missiles, and other attacks. Such developments are dangerous and have potential to escalate the ongoing conflict into a regional one. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and desist from unilateral actions or retaliation that will be detrimental to the civilian population and peace of the region. Mr. President, it is especially important at this time that the focus remains on the critical issue at hand, which is the cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip, leading to the peaceful resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict through the two-state solution. The level of suffering in the Gaza is unprecedented. It has been reported that over 33,500 Palestinians have been killed, over 76,000 more injured, and estimated 1.7 million internally displaced. Yet, Israel continues its intense military operation in the Gaza Strip, as well as raids in the occupied West Bank, further escalating tensions and risk of a regional spillover. A prolonged war means no one group of people will be spared in the occupied territory, not the civilians or humanitarian workers, healthcare providers, or journalists. Quite recently, following the report of the killing of 7 World Central Kitchen humanitarian workers, it has been reported that a UNICEF convoy was attacked en route to northern Gaza to deliver life-saving aid, including therapeutic food for children at risk of malnutrition and preventable mortality. We are deeply concerned about the findings of the United Nations Interagency Assessment Mission in Khan Yunis, which indicates that the town has been marred by the profound destruction of homes, schools, hospitals, roads, and other infrastructures. In the face of this critical challenging situation, we must not renege as a council with regards to the Charter responsibility to maintain international peace and security. The Council must build on its important interventions through the adoption of Resolution 2712, 2720, and 2728, and consider the important issue of implementation of its resolutions. in recounting the effort made by the international community to address the plight of the civilians in Gaza and in Israel, Sierra Leone expresses support to the United Nations Secretary General and its representatives and commend their work in difficult circumstances. We commend the humanitarian aid workers, including the UNRWA staff, who have demonstrated exceptional professionalism and empathy in their work, with some paying the ultimate price. Sierra Leone expresses its deepest condolences to their loved ones and families. Mr. President, at this stage of our engagement and as we collectively work towards having a lasting solution to this long-standing conflict, Sierra Leone would like to reiterate the following point. Firstly, we emphasize the need for parties to the conflict to adhere to the numerous calls for an immediate, permanent ceasefire and allow for expanded flow of humanitarian assistance through all modalities and to implement in full Resolution 2728 and the previous resolutions of the UN Security Council 2712 and 2720, which are not only still valid,